Welcome, everybody, to the Baseball Blueprint Podcast, your home for all things player development, where we highlight some of the best instructors in baseball. This podcast is brought to you by the Baseball Bluebook. Are you in the book? I'm your host, Cody Dennis, and today's guest is a former NCAA assistant coach who has experience developing talent at the highest levels of the game, including being named to the USA Baseball National Team Development Staff. Our guest is a highly sought-after speaker and clinician who has experience speaking at the ABCA National Convention, Pitchapalooza, and countless other gatherings of baseball minds. He founded a clinic of his own in 2015 called CatcherCon, which has gained notoriety across the baseball world. We're happy to welcome Xan Barksdale. Xan, thanks for coming on.
Cody, man, thanks for having me. I appreciate you asking me to be here, and I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast.
Awesome. So we're going to get right into this. Xan, what initially drew you to coaching and how'd your career begin?
Well, to answer the first part of that, I think not all, but a lot of baseball players, when you grow up, you just can't imagine not being part of the game. You can't imagine not going to the ballpark every day or not showing up to the field or not hitting in the cages or whatever it may be. So when I was little, I knew I wanted to play for as long as I possibly could. And then I knew that once my playing days were over, it was going to be hard for me to give up. So I wanted to get into coaching. And I've said it a couple of times before, but I think it's important to say here, when I was a young coach, I got into baseball coaching because I just wanted to be around the game. I like being around the guys. I like the companion, the camaraderie, and all that stuff, the competitive nature. But as you grow a little bit older and you gain a little more insight, the really valuable and the really rewarding part is the relationships you have and the impact you're able to make on players and opportunities you're able to help with and things like that. So I got into it probably for selfish or personal reasons, but I've stayed in it because I love it, and there's nothing else like it with building relationships and watching guys, hopefully fulfill their dreams and try their best. So that's kind of my story of why I started coaching and how I got into it. A little background to give a little more context. I played college at Holmes Community College, and then I played at Ole Miss, where Coach Mike Bianco was the head coach. Dan McDonald, current head coach at University of Louisville, was the assistant coach, recruiting coordinator. Then I played 3 years in the minor leagues with the Braves. In 2006, my last year with the Braves, after a road game, I had a message from Coach Mack, and I called him back after the game. He said, "Hey, I just interviewed at the University of Louisville. I think I'm going to get the job, and if I have it, I'd like you to come on board as an assistant coach with me." And I was like, wow, this is a lot to process. Like, I just got finished with the game. I'm still playing. I haven't retired from playing. But I knew just my role. I knew my playing days were probably limited, probably numbered. And I knew I always wanted to get into coaching. And just growing up in the South, everybody's a college baseball fan. There are some MLB fans. You got some Braves fans and some Texas fans. But if you grow up in the South, you're growing up watching SEC baseball. And I always wanted to coach in college. So this was a great opportunity for me to, one, work with somebody who I knew and trusted and loved, and two, get into college baseball. So it just seemed like the right move. The timing felt right, and it's a hard decision to make at the time to get out of playing and into coaching. But for me, as you're able to look back and kind of connect the dots, as some other people say, it's one of the most important decisions I made, and I'm really glad I did because it's had a tremendously positive outcome in my life.
That's awesome. So from those early years, can you share some challenges you kind of had to endure? I know you came right from playing to a really high level of the game. What was that like?
Yeah, well, that was definitely a challenge. One thing, I think a lot of coaches probably, face some sort of struggle of, do I know what I'm talking about? Are the guys going to trust me? Are they going to believe me? And here I am. I'm literally playing like a week before. I think school started in Louisville around August 20th, and I had to be there for the first day. And so literally last week I was a professional baseball player. This week I'm a college coach, which on the one hand, the players, they received it very well, and they welcomed me. But you kind of have that, holy cow, I haven't been coaching for 15 years. I don't necessarily know all the things now. Back in 2006, social media isn't like it is now, or wasn't like it is now.
Yeah.
So the way that ideas are shared, things were a lot slower. If you had to go to a coaching conference, or you had to have a network or talk to people. So I was kind of scared, like, holy cow. I mean, I feel like I have convictions and I think I know what I'm talking about, but how can I get these guys to buy in, and how can I get them to believe me when I'm only a couple of years older than some of the guys on the team? I think we had one fifth-year senior that I was, 2 years older than him. So it's like, holy cow, how can I get these guys to respect me? While at the same time, gaining their trust and all the other stuff involved with that. So that's that's a struggle that I think a lot of young coaches face. And for me, there kind of has to be a separation of church and state. You on the field, and you have to be professional and work with the guys. You can have a friendship and a relationship with them, but you have to draw the line. So for the young guys that are wanting to get into coaching, I can imagine that would be a struggle if you're trying to coach guys in a program that you were a player the year before. But that's something you have to do. You just have to kind of draw the line and treat it like a job, and treat it like your profession, and kind of separate the relationships that you previously had with guys as a player to player, and kind of turn that into a coach to player.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense for sure. So when you're taking that path of developing as a coach, how has your teaching philosophy kind of evolved to now? I'm sure that's an experience that changes a lot throughout the process of learning how to coach well and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the most logical thing to do would start off by one thing that has stayed the same. So one thing that I learned from the coaches that I played for and spent time with, I was fortunate, and I was around some really, really good instructors. Coach Bianco at Ole Miss, and Coach DuPont at Holmes, and Coach Mack at Ole Miss, and then Louisville. I learned that the best coaches, in my opinion, are the best teachers. They're the players around them, and the players in the best programs have really good understandings of what they're supposed to do, why they're supposed to do it. They don't just, it's not just rote memorization where, okay, the ball comes to me, I do this. It's not the bunt defense. Okay, on bunt defense 1, this is my job. But it's on bunt defense 1, this is the goal of the team, and this is what we're trying to accomplish it, and this is my role inside that. So I've always felt that teaching and having the guys have a really good understanding of baseball is one of the most important things that coaches do. And so for me, that's something that, again, I learned early on, and I'm grateful to have been around such fantastic instructors and coaches. But I think that's one thing that has stuck with me. And I still say anytime I'm at a camp or in a clinic, I want to teach guys the game, not just have them know what to do, in their one position. And if you moved a guy from second to short, would he could be completely lost. Hopefully, if we do a good job teaching, they understand the concepts, and have a better understanding of what we're trying to accomplish there. So that's one thing that's definitely stayed the same. One thing that I do now, I think I probably ask a lot more questions than I used to. And I think I've always been curious, but when I speak to a player, I really want them to have the understanding. It's not just me telling you like, hey, Cody, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But it's, hey, why do you think we're doing this? What would happen if this, what would happen if we did this? Why, how could this change? What about this scenario? And so I think we try to foster a thought process. And to me, that's a big part of it, whether it's, for catching specifically, whether it's calling pitches or it's a bunt defense or a first and third defense, but it's understanding the why behind it and understanding the process. Similar to hitting instructors, there's a lot of guys that can teach the physical aspects of a swing, but swinging and hitting is very different. You have to have the right approach. You have to be able to stick to your plan. You have to have discipline. So swinging and hitting is different. I think there's, very similarities in catching, but I want guys to have an understanding. And so I'm going to get there a lot of times by asking a lot of questions and kind of forcing them to think things through themselves.
That makes sense. And I think when you mention explaining the why, that does make it a little bit more powerful when it comes to receiving that information, because now it's not just regurgitation of whatever coach said, but now I know why that makes me better, right? And that's something that especially younger players, often when they get to the college level, they just want to do what they're told because they're getting so much like new information. It's wonderful, but the why really holds it true. I guess there's some reason behind it, and it gives you some validity as you work through that process, because as you know from doing it forever, like there's a ton of failure when you're learning these new movements and drills or whatever we're learning, right? But the palatability of the information comes from the understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. So
No doubt, and I think it's twofold. I think it's better for the player, but I think it's also better for the coach. Like I said, in my experience, when you have those conversations and when you get guys to give you information back, you're able to receive it and understand how they process it.
yeah,
So some guys, they'll work. I found if I'm explaining a receiving technique or a throwing technique, if you say, okay, what were your takeaways there? Some guys are going to try to use the exact same verbiage and the exact same terminology that I use. And that's fine. That's kind of their learning style. They want to repeat that and they want to memorize that. And some other guys, they may, replay it back to you in totally different terms. And that just tells you something about their thought process, that maybe they're not necessarily looking for the key words, but they're looking for the bigger concepts or bigger principles. And so I think you can learn a lot just by listening. So I like to ask questions. I like guys to have a conversation with me, so that one, I can hopefully, improve their understanding of the game and strategy. But also it gives me like, okay, this is how this guy learns. This is the terminology he likes to use. If I can kind of, if I can speak his language,
Yeah,
I feel like we have a lot better relationship and a lot better process for everybody.
that makes sense. That makes sense. And so when you're teaching and you're instructing, we're understanding the value of the why behind the information. Is there something, an aspect? Let's get catching specific. Are there different teaching points that maybe you addressed early on in your career that you're saying, oh, I've learned something new here? Now that technical instruction for this thing is different, is there something that you could kind of point to there?
Oh man, there's a lot, and it's funny. You'd like to think. I've joked about it before, and like, man, the guys I was coaching when I was early, I want to apologize to those guys.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
sorry. Things have just changed so much now, and it's really
Mhm.
crazy. I mean, obviously, there's been, when I started, coaching in the fall of 2006. I mean, it's been almost 20 years. It's amazing how much has changed in 20 years. We'll get to the catching, but if you talk about hitting, there's obviously different hitting approaches and hitting styles. With the metrics, people have
Yeah.
or organizations have put more value on home runs and less on strikeouts, and so on and so forth. And the same is true with pitching. Whether it be, I think last year, the year before, I've forgotten now, was the first time in the history of baseball that more off-speed pitches were thrown than fastballs. So there's just changes there, and catching is no exception. I mean, there are definitely changes been made in catching. I think the most noticeable one to the average fan or the common person watching are the stances. For a long time, you were in a traditional 2 feet on the ground stance. So you were in a primary stance or a secondary stance, which is more elevated. Now around 2016, 17 ish, there started to be a shift where a one knee stance was more widely adopted, because it seems to give guys a better, put them in a better position to be able to receive, while not compromising their blocking. And some guys even throw better out of a one knee down stance. So that's probably the most noticeable one that draws the most attention, on social media and online and coaching circles. But also receiving. I mean, the receiving technique, it used to be, stick it and be strong and hold it there for the umpire to see. And now there's more movement, manipulation, where we're kind of trying to, steal those borderline strikes. So I think those are the biggest things. I think, when you're younger or some time ago, when it comes to blocking, there was always more emphasis on the mechanical aspects. Hey, you got to get to this position and round your shoulders and do this and do that. Where now it's much more about just kind of the process. Like, hey, I don't care what you do, just get in front of it somehow. Maybe that's use your glove. That's been a big one. It used to be forbidden, to use your glove when you're blocking, where you just had to center it in the body, in your chest, or your chest protector, your stomach. When now it's taught, like, yeah, why we have a glove on our hand? Why not use it?
Hmm.
I remember growing up and having to do blocking drills where if you got caught using your glove, you had to throw it off to the side and put your hands behind your back and block like that. Now I'm sure there's maybe some guys still doing it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing if you are, because it's probably good for some things, but also understanding that using your glove is a positive. So I don't know why we would want to have an athletic guy behind the plate and then tell him he's not allowed to use his glove. So those are the three big ones: the stances, the receiving techniques, then I think blocking, using your mitt some. I think those are probably the most common or most noticeable changes in the past 15, 20 years.
And so when you're working with younger players, are those some of the things that you see in regards to their development as like maybe some potential uh, development focused areas or problem areas that you want to address?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think if I had to generalize the guys that I work with, you have guys that have no instruction. They're coming to you for the first time, or their parents want to come to a camp because they live in the middle of nowhere in Iowa or South Dakota, and there's not a catching instructor within 100 miles. So they say, man, we got to get to a camp. We got to try to get some instruction. So you have somebody who's kind of a blank slate,
Yeah.
and then you have other guys who they are into the social media, and they are into going to the camps, and they're going to the clinics and things, and they're exposed to so much more. So you kind of get two ends of the spectrum there. Which I think is really interesting. So you kind of have to approach those guys differently, because some guys say, "Hey, well, I saw this and I heard an interview with this catcher was talking about this, and what do you think about that?" So you kind of have to meet them in the middle and find out where they are, and find out what they know first. Like what
Yeah.
is their level, their current level of knowledge, and what information they've been exposed to, whether it be right, wrong, or indifferent. You just kind of need to know what they've been taught so far, and then you can kind of begin the technical aspects and tell them what you think and why. And I don't want to get too long winded with that, but I think now one thing that's probably changed over the past number of years, I would say I have less rules and more principles.
Okay.
So when it comes to blocking, like, hey, we're going to try to fit our blocking under this umbrella of general principles, not necessarily these 5 rules. Like both your knees have to be on the ground, your shoulders have to be rounded full. I don't want guys necessarily just like you don't want to approach a golf ball with 15 swing thoughts when you're approaching,
Right.
a blocking. I don't think you want to have 10 different blocking thoughts as well. It's kind of simplify it, put it under umbrella. This is what we're trying to accomplish, and then how can we organize our body, to make that happen.
That makes sense. I think a lot of young coaches, and I'm definitely guilty of this, will find these concrete ideas and concepts that we want to apply to our team, and then you start to notice as the game goes on, like it allows very little room for improv. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you're in this game, it's so human and it's changing all the time, and you're kind of sticking these guys in a corner where they're not able to adjust. It really doesn't put them at an advantage. But when you give them an idea of like, hey, these are some concepts that I've seen that really good players use, uh, and then allow them to get creative with that, that's something that especially when I'm watching like rookie ball, like young players, and having the luxury of being in Florida for the past year, I've been able to catch a ton of complex league games. But you can definitely see where the standards are and also the room for creativity they allow their defenders to have. For
Yeah.
example, on the catching side, you're looking at most of the guys are working from a one knee down stance. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there were a select few that I saw working from a traditional 2 feet on the ground stance, and almost all were working some kind of wave motion from the ground up
Mm-hmm.
when they're working reception. Now that's a level where the pitchers are notorious for being a little bit more erratic, right? So traditionally, you would think like, hey, are we putting these guys in a position to focus on receiving or blocking? Like that's the choice that people talk about when they talk about that one knee down. But you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing at that level, like these guys are super athletic. These catchers, like they're being encouraged to use their glove to make plays. And I mean, from a situation where again you have more erratic pitchers to be able to body things up from a one knee down stance while they're learning this too. These are 17, 18-year-old guys, learning these processes. And at the highest level, the freedom these coaches are giving them to do that, it's pretty impressive to watch.
Absolutely. And just to clarify, I definitely have, rules or constants or, things that I'm not really willing to budge on. But I
Yeah,
think in general, as a whole, I think, I have a lot fewer of those than I do, guiding principles that, we can use to make a decision in the heat of the moment so that a player is never in a situation like, oh my gosh, we haven't covered this exact situation with this scenario and that. Like, no, you want them to understand the game, know the strategy, understand what we're trying to accomplish, and then hopefully they can figure it out on their own. Because I mean, I watch MLB Network every morning. Like I get to my desk, I turn on MLB Network, I watch MLB Central, and I mean, almost every day there is some crazy play that you've never seen before.
yeah,
I mean, maybe not every single day, but multiple times a week there is some wacky play that the umpires are having to get together and discuss, or something's going on. It's just like there's no way to prepare for every single situation.
right,
So we just want to prepare guys to be able to prepare in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the battle, to be able to hopefully make the right decisions, quickly, when there's a lot going on.
right. Absolutely, absolutely. So let's switch gears here a little bit more towards your catcher con that you've created in 2015. So what kind of inspired you to start that up, and how is that? I mean, that's super wide reaching. It seems like every catcher guy that I talk to, Colin Wilbur's a name I'm going to shout out here because he's just
Yeah.
incredible. But he was one of the first who kind of pointed me towards CatcherCon, uh, and he talked about just the forward thinking ideas and the ability to get in close quarters and communicate with these really high level coaches. Can you explain a little bit more about that and how you came to have that idea and get that going?
Yeah, I mean, CatcherCon for me that's my baby. I mean, that's the thing I love. I mean, it is a really fun weekend in December, where a lot of catching people from across the world get together. But yeah, it started in 2015, and really it started before that. When I finished at Ole Miss, I was going back to help out, before the next spring training, and I told Coach Bianco like, hey, I want to get into coaching at some point. I'd like to be around the program. I'd like to help however I can. He
Hmm.
said, okay, great. And he said, okay, well, you need to go to the ABCA with me ABCA convention in Nashville with me in January. So that January, I guess that would have been January 2005, I guess. Went to the Nashville convention. I was fired up. I'm a young guy who wants to get into coaching sometime in the next couple of years. And they had like two catching guys. I think one spoke on either Friday or Saturday, late Saturday, and one spoke on Sunday morning, like after I had to already leave. So it was kind of like a light bulb went off, like, what's going on? Like, this is the best baseball, coaching conference out there. They had two guys speak on catching the entire weekend. Like, this is really watered down. There's like four infield guys. There's like multiple
Mhm.
base running guys, and not that that's not important, but for somebody like me who feels like catching is the most important aspect of the game, or but besides our starting pitching, but
Yeah.
from a position standpoint, catching is the most important, and it gets the least amount of attention. So I thought this is just kind of wonky. So I didn't have an immediate reaction to that, but I kind of filed it away. And then once I got into coaching, I was like, man, it would be really cool to have just a catching conference. And again, just like I got into coaching for selfish reasons, I think I got into CatcherCon for selfish reasons. I just wanted to get all these guys together and kind of pick their brain over the weekend. And I
Yeah.
thought, well, maybe I can just sell tickets to it and I can pay for it and it'll be paid for, and it's not going to cost me a ton out of pocket to sit with these great catching coaches. So that's kind of how it started. But what it's grown into has been unbelievable. And I would argue that there's no other coaching conference like it in the country where everybody is an open book. I mean, everybody's willing to share. I don't care if you're a coach in the big leagues, and we have guys that are currently coaching in the big leagues who have spoken and
Mhm.
will continue to speak. We have college coaches, we have private instructors. A lot of times in the hitting world or the pitching world or a football world, guys they keep their cards pretty close to the vest and they don't necessarily want to tell their secrets. Where the catching world is unique. I mean, it really is like a brotherhood where if you're trying something that's working, man, you come and you share it. Or if you're doing something that you're having trouble with, reach out to some of these guys you're making a connection with, and they'll be willing to talk to you. I mean, it really is cool when a 14-year-old catcher shows up with his dad, and he's able to sit and talk to somebody who's played in the big leagues, currently coaching in the big leagues or the minor leagues or college, or private instructor who they may know from social media or where have you. It is really powerful. So to me, I mean, the coolest part about it is how open guys are to share, but it's also the network of people you're around. So over the past 2 years, we have about 50% of the big league organizations show up. So it's about 15. I'd love to have all 30 teams there. Maybe we'll get there at some point, but it's continued to grow every single year. Just the nature of it. I mean, it is kind of a niche thing. It's a small thing. There will never be CatcherCon with 2,500 people. That would be just too much to manage and too much. So, but it's grown every year, which is great. So we're having more people show up, which they're sharing more information, and then you just you learn so much. I mean, every year I walk away, I'm like, holy crap! Like I thought I knew about this, and this guy really taught me about that. You spoke about Colin a few minutes ago.
Mhm.
Colin spoke a couple of years ago, had an awesome presentation on throwing. So I still use some of the drills that he shared in his presentation with the guys that I work with. So every year I go, I feel like I'm just adding a little bit more knowledge to the library, a little bit more drills in the database.
Yeah.
And so over the years, hopefully you can expand your knowledge. And I think that's part of the reason that, my instruction, I feel like, has improved because I've been there, and I wouldn't speak for anybody else, but I've had other people tell me the same thing. So that's really special to me. And just knowing the reach that, if I had a camp of 50 campers, you're impacting 50 people. But if you have a catcher con and you have, let's say, 150 catching coaches there, man, the people that they're going to reach and they're going to spread, it really, it just really expands it and helps get information out there, and just shares our love for the game.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Let's take a little bit deeper dive here. One of your earliest coaching experiences, like you've mentioned, came when you assisted Dan McDonald at Louisville. Do you have a favorite memory of that relationship that maybe it was like a little bit of a wake up moment for you as a coach, or something that you would consider a kind of path defining moment?
Man, that is a great question. And I'm glad you asked it like that, because a lot of times on a podcast, they get asked like, hey, tell me about Coach Mack and what do you think about
Yeah.
him, and this and that. And those are great questions. I love talking about it. But when you ask about the relationship, that's something that really touches me close to my heart. And just for context, before I get into this, Coach Mack was in my wedding. I got married, been married 5 years, be 6 in August. He was in my wedding. That's how important of a figure he's been to me. I think when you're talking about coaching and when you're talking about the impacts and the relationships, I mean, man, he's a guy that I love to death. I think one, he's a phenomenal coach. I mean, as far as teaching the game and the instruction and being able to motivate, he's fantastic. But as a person, I mean, he's absolute first class. I mean, I don't know if people listening go to church or they have different views, whatever. But he's going to church. He's a family man. He's doing what he can for his family. I mean, it's not fake at all. I mean, he's first class, 100% of the way. And like I said, it meant so much to me that I asked him to be in my wedding. But when I speak about our relationship, and to get back to the coaching side of it, a couple of things that stick out to me, and again, it's hard to notice at the time you're in it, but once you've left and you look back, here I was a 24 or 25-year-old, young coach, had never coached before. I had been brought up in a good college program, and I played in a good minor league organization, but I had never coached. He gave me complete autonomy to do whatever I want. He was not looking at my notes like, "Hey, Xan, what are you going to cover in practice today?" And I had to run it by him. No, I don't think you need to do that. I think you need to do that. I mean, it was complete autonomy. And we had some really good teams. I mean, the first year we went to the College World Series, and then we had numerous conference championships and regionals and super regionals. So there's a lot on the line with good teams like that. And he's trying to make himself a name for himself as a young head coach, and to just put so much trust in the guys he works with. And that's not just true for me, but it could be the other assistant coach, the other hitting guys, the pitching guys, the operations guys. He trusts the people he works with to make good decisions. And it gives him complete autonomy. So for me, that was a huge blessing, and it allowed me to experiment and learn. Find myself. I wasn't in this mold of you have to do it this way, or you have to cover this. You get to have some freedom and flexibility. So that's the number one thing I noticed about that. Number two, I would say it didn't happen very often. I think I really only remember it once, and I hate to admit it, but I will. Like, he had to jump my ass like one time.
Mhm.
I can't remember exactly what I was doing, but I wasn't doing what I was supposed to doing, and he put me in place. And it reminded me, like, okay, like I get it. I've been messing up. I understand. And you just sit there and you say, "Yes, sir. I get it. I understand. I agree with you. You're right."
Mhm.
And then you kind of go. I have a lot of respect for somebody that's willing to have those hard conversations with you face to face,
Yeah.
because I think now in today's age, a lot of people don't like to. And hey, look, nobody likes having the conversations where there's confrontation, and you're sharing an unpleasant message. But the way he's able to do that with me and with the guys in the program, it just shares that, hey, I'm real, I'm authentic. If I have a problem, or if there's an issue going on, or you're not holding up your end of the bargain, like, we're going to talk about it. We're going to have a conversation. And I think that's an important thing for for anybody listening. Whether it's a coach to player relationship, maybe it's an assistant coach to a head coach relationship, or it's maybe just a spouse, it's a spouse relationship, or boyfriend or girlfriend relationship. Like, you have to learn how to have those conversations. And that was one of the things that I learned from him as well. So I loved him. If he needed to come down on me, he'd come down on me, and that wouldn't affect our relationship. Again, I only remember one conversation like that, but it's important to him. It sticks out, that he cared enough for me that he can call me out when I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. So I love him for that. And it's just like I said before, he's just really a really good person. I think one of his superhuman powers is he gets more done in half a day than I think most people get done in like 2 days. He's like the most efficient person I've ever met. He could have a to-do list of 50 things on it, and he'd be penciling more down at the bottom by lunch because he already finished all 50. I'm like, how did you do that? Like, I'm still working on the practice schedule for the day, and you've already knocked out like a week's worth of work. So that was one of the things that always really impressed me about him. But like I said, off the field, the relationship stuff, that's absolutely the most impressive part.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you've had this experience with coaching with some of the best coaches in the game, getting involved with USA Baseball, and learning just from really brilliant minds through Petricon and your various experiences. What would you say would be some like relevant, hard hitting advice that you would give young aspiring coaches who want to get to the position where they're able to really enjoy life in the game?
Man, so when you talk about advice to give young guys, the first two things that really pop in my mind are, number one, you have to have the right amount of knowledge, and things have changed. There used to be a lot of coaching books written and DVDs put out, and that was the way you learned. now with social media and video, there's probably less books being written, but there's still, information being put out on Instagram or Twitter or a person's blog or whatever. But you want to learn. You want to have a good base of information so that you can work with a lot of different players. Like I talked about earlier, it's not always like, hey, it's my way or the highway. We have to do it exactly like this. Because the spread of information, people see things and people learn differently. And I think guys now are exposed to more and more, thoughts or techniques or processes. And so as a coach, you need to understand different ways because, you know, this might work for you and it might not work for him, and it might work for him but it doesn't work for you. So we need to have different ways to teach, similar things. So I think number one, having the right knowledge is available. So go to conferences. If you're a catching guy, I'd love to have you at CatcherCon. Go to ABCA conference, and listen to the guys there. Find a pitching conference. My buddy Lance Wheeler used to have one called Pitchapalooza. Hopefully he'll bring that back. But there's other clinics and places. There's state clinics all over the country that do a great job. Go to the clinics and listen to as many speakers as you can, and try to learn as much as possible so that you have a good foundation in what you believe and why. And I think two things happen when you go. You go and it either reaffirms your beliefs and say, yeah, man, I like what that guy said. That made a lot of sense. I'm going to take that back and teach with my guys. Or it's perfectly okay to disagree with somebody. And I think that also makes you stronger in your convictions as well. You can, okay, he said, he likes doing it this way. I still think I like doing it my way. And I see the contrast and I understand why. But I think when you have that knowledge and you see different people do things different ways, I think it helps you connect with the players
Yeah.
so much better. And then the second thing beyond the knowledge is I feel like it's kind of taboo to say at times, but your network. I mean,
Yeah.
the more people you are absolutely going to be in a better position to get a job.
Definitely.
And again, I just want to clarify. I think it's important that it's not just networking where it's like, oh my gosh, if I go meet this guy, he's going to hire me, and it's not as simple as that. But you have to know people. When coaches hire people, who do you want to hire? You want to hire good instructors, good people that you trust or that have a recommendation. I would say very, very rarely does a coach, a head coach, have a stack of applications or a stack of resumes and they just start flipping through it and they have no idea who they're looking at and they pick the candidates off the resumes alone. They're going to use recommendations from other coaches,
Yeah.
so I get asked a lot like, hey, Coach Xan, I'm looking to get a job. I'm going to change schools. Can you help me out? And I say, I'll keep my ears to the ground. And if I can, I'll be more than willing to help and give advice. But I think having a network of people that you know and trust is very important. So when you go to these events, whether it be a CatcherCon or an ABCA or whatever it is, man, meet as many people as possible. Social media, maybe it's not a face-to-face conversation or interaction, but meet these people and have a relationship with them so that when you see them at a conference or a clinic or a state convention, you can go up to them and you can talk to them, you can build that relationship. I think if I had to, put my coaching superpower on paper, like I talked about Coach Max's, his efficiency, I think mine is probably my network. I really
Yeah.
do. I think if I have a question at any time, if I'm in my office and I'm looking at something and I'm watching a video and I'm just kind of scratching my head like, man, what's going on here? Why is he doing that? I have a huge network of guys that I can call, from guys in the big leagues, guys in the minor leagues, guys in college, other private instructors. I mean, I feel like I'm one degree of separation away from everybody in the catching world.
Yeah.
And so, well, a lot of people think that's great if you wanted a job or this or that, but no, it helps my coaching as well.
Yeah.
When I know those guys, I can call up my buddies and be like, hey man, I saw your video you put on Instagram, like kind of cool drill, like what's going on? And they tell you the thought process behind that. Because I mean, I think guys in baseball know there's so much more to uh, the emphasis on why you're doing what you're doing, not just, hey, put this training mitt on and catch the ball and everything's going to be fine, but
Right.
they're really understanding what they're trying to accomplish and what's the process behind it. So man, please, build your network. And again, don't do it just for, I'm going to meet this guy so I can get his job and he can help me out with that. I mean, no, do it to help you gain more knowledge, have a bigger group of guys you can call on at any time if you have a question or something you
Mhm.
want to discuss or whatnot. But then also, yeah, if you know a guy, I mean, it would be hard for me to recommend somebody for a job that I've never met or I don't know.
Right.
But if a job opens up and I'd be like, man, there's this young guy that he's coaching over here. I know he's looking to move on. You know, I think this might be a good fit. And that's happened a number of times. And that's always fun when it works out like that. But man, you need to meet people. If you're just kind of living in a bubble and you don't have a very big network, it's probably going to be hard for you to progress. And again, I'm not saying that the best ideas don't win, because the best ideas do win, but you need to be able to put your ideas in front of the right people at the right time.
Right. That's awesome. That's gold, man. Uh, everyone, we're super appreciative to have Xan on the podcast. Xan, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights in the game of catching and really just from coaching growth and personal growth. So thank you. We appreciate having you on. And we're looking forward to seeing how CatcherCon and Catching 101 continues to grow, because those are two things that if you're a catching person, you need to make sure you address. Make sure you look into those. We'll have links to those as well as we start to post our podcast. So thank you, Xan. We appreciate it.
Cody, man, thank you. And just one more time, I mean, I really appreciate this. A passion of mine is sharing knowledge, whether it be through a camp or a coaching conference, but trying to, improve coaches' understanding of the game and the reach and the impact they're having on players across the country. So I think you're doing the exact same thing with podcasts like this. And man, I appreciate what you're doing as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you again to Baseball Blue Book for hosting this podcast. You guys are awesome. Make sure you guys check them out. Their links will be attached as well in the description below on the YouTube channel. Thank you.